Georgie, welcome.
How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for doing this with me. We've done several of these, and I just appreciate it every time. I think it's amazing stuff.
Likewise, man. Thanks for inviting me again.
Awesome. Before we get going, I just want to say to anyone who's listening to this that we have done, like I said, several of these before. So if you want to go back and listen to any of those, I encourage it. Also, if you want to hear about Georgie's background, he goes into that in our first podcast quite extensively and talks about why he's a great person to listen to, why he knows or how he has learned so much and become such an enthusiast of health and health issues. So I encourage listeners to go back and listen to that first podcast. Also, Georgie's done several podcasts with Danny Roddy. Those are phenomenal, just so much content. And if you have the time and you're interested, I totally encourage you to go listen to the Danny Roddy and Georgie podcasts. He's also done some with Joe Dell of Joe Dell Fit, which I've found really interesting. And sometimes they're just another angle of some of this stuff, or a different kind of vantage point that people can kind of glean from. So I encourage listeners to check that stuff out. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the declining health of the young. Yeah. And this comes from about a month ago. I saw a Twitter post from an MD, a doctor who's got tens of thousands of followers. And she commented that the statistics are clear that there is a skyrocketed amount of prediabetes in young people. And I immediately thought of Georgie because he's been posting studies for years on the Ray Peat forum and also on his website about the declining health of the young, and how he agrees it is very clear that our young people are becoming less healthy, less strong, less just more frail.
Yeah, less vital. I mean, basically older, like biologically older. That's what they're becoming.
Yeah, less energetic for sure, and aging faster, exactly. And so one of the comments that MD made on Twitter was that she thinks every parent in the world should know and tell their kids to stop consuming sweet foods, sweet stuff, sugar. And in some ways I kind of jumped back and I thought, wow, this is, her first point was good, like health is declining, but her second point seems to miss some of the biological underpinnings of some of these increased diseases or for the young. So I wanted to jump into it with you and just hear your thoughts. Like, why are the youth declining in health so rapidly as years go on?
Right. Before I answer, I'll just want to throw something in regards to that comment by the doctor saying like eat less sweet stuff, right? Well, I posted a study not long ago on my blog which showed that Americans have been following the recommendations of FDA and their doctor pretty religiously. So over the last 30 years, they've done a dramatic change of their diet. They've reduced sweets by about 40%. They're exercising more. They're eating less. And despite all of that, we're seeing this massive increase in all of these chronic diseases. So if anything else, like don't blame that people are not doing what you tell them they are, but we're getting kind of like the opposite result of what we were expecting to get. So really like this doctor it's a lot of food for thought for her profession, is like, it's not that patients are non-compliant. I mean, some of them are, right? But it's like, if you look at the compliance and how it correlates with health, it turns out that the people who are least compliant tend to fare the best when it comes to some really, really serious diseases like cancer or like cardiovascular disease or Alzheimer's and things like that. So it's really food for thought. But I think the medical profession is not yet ready to talk about, and we're going to get into that, to talk about the scary possibility that maybe they're not helping their patients. Maybe, and this real scary thought is maybe they're actually hurting them. And if you think I'm being scaremongering and fear-mongering people, keep in mind that the number 3 reason for death in the United States is iatrogenic. In other words, caused by a doctor, a medical procedure, a drug, or anything else related to the medical industry. So the number 3 reason of death in the United States is by your doctor or somebody else in the medical industry trying to help you. So the evidence is already there. I just think the medical profession will do everything possible to not talk about it, because it will probably lead to some pretty nasty consequences. I mean, either people at the very best, people will just stop going to the doctor, and at worst, we might see some retaliation against the doctors. We're already seeing some of that, but they happen to be more isolated cases, or at least the media is reporting the more isolated cases where like a relative of a patient walked into a hospital. It happened about 2 months ago in Baltimore, which is not far from where I live, and shot 4 doctors because those doctors operated on this person's mom, and they paralyzed her. So she basically came into the hospital for elective surgery on the spine. And she was walking, right? She was walking fine. She basically was doing this to improve her quality of life. So she wasn't disabled. She was walking fine. Like things were more or less okay. But her doctor convinced her that this thing that's on her back, like that she had like I think she had a ruptured disc, or it was about to rupture. The doctor thought it was about to rupture. So it was entirely elective surgery. In other words, the doctor didn't think it was medically justified. It was more like, if you do this, it'll be better for you, but it's not necessary. It'll be better for you. And she agreed, and she ended up being paralyzed. And I think eventually she died because they damaged her spinal cord. And needless to say, her son was pretty distraught. And they actually didn't allow him to come into the hospital to see her, so he suspected this cover up. And eventually the hospital kind of pulled together to like really ban him from getting many of the records that were related to his mom. So he lost it. He walked in with a gun and basically shot 4 doctors and himself. So anyways, let's go back to the health of the young declining. I think one of the first signs that this was starting to happen in the early 90s. There was a seminal study that showed that the rates of autism are drastically increasing. And the study covered mostly children that are between 2 years and 6 years of age. But it raised the alarm. It said something that study directly said that this cannot be genetic. Such a massive increase over 40 times over the last, let's say, 50 years. This cannot possibly be a genetic explanation. Immediately, there were editorials being published in JAMA and Nature and Cell, like the elite journals of the medical industry, saying, no, we don't think this is a real increase. What's really happening is there's better diagnostics. Our understanding of disease is improving. So things that were going on undetected before, now we're actually putting a name to them, and that's what really happens. But since that study, which was almost 30 years ago, these studies did not stop. I mean, if this study was a fluke, you would have expected that it would more or less stabilize, right? But that the rate of autism kept increasing, and as of right now, basically 2.4 out of every 100 children that's the rate of autism, 2.4 per 100. That's almost 3%, and that's an increase from less than 1% 30 years ago. So that's like a 300% increase over the span of 3 decades. So basically it's doubling every 10 years or so. And even now, basically, because now it's become too, even doctors cannot deny that something is going on, right? So now the official version has actually changed. Is yes, it is environmental. We still think there's a genetic component. We don't know what the genetic component is. We'll keep talking about it. There's genetic because we love the genes, right? I mean, if it's genetic, we can develop a drug for it to block that gene or activate it or whatever. But we now admit that about 80% of the risk for autism is environmental. What is it due to? Oh, we don't know. I mean, who knows? It could be a million things. Poor diet, irresponsible lifestyle, right? But these things are actually kind of true. But the question is, to what point are they due to the patient, and to what degree they're due to the patient? To what degree really is the environment that's around you that's limiting you? Right. I mean, there's all this talk about how much choice we have, but if you walk into a store, even an organic store, and pick like your favorite products, pick 10 of them, or pick every single one from a particular type that you like. Let's say you like cheese, right? Take all the cheeses and look at the label, and I guarantee you that a significant number of them will contain either carrageenan or these emulsifying gums like carob bean gum, locust bean gum, acacia gum. All of these, carrageenan is actually banned as a known carcinogen in certain European countries. The gums are actually, I think in Europe, they're not allowed to be used in human in food products for humans. They're actually only allowed for animals. And I'm not trying to pick on the United States. There's stuff that the United States bans, but the European Union allows. So it's basically pick your poison, right? But the bottom line is, you think you have a choice, but if all of your choices that are provided that we rely upon of the food supply system, if they're all compromised, then it's not really a choice, right? It's like
Yeah.
just exactly, just pick your poison.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so around the early 2000s, studies started to come out showing a dramatic increase in the rates of colon cancer in people under 40 years of age. And colon cancer, up until today, if you actually talk to an oncologist, the stereotype about colon cancer and a bunch of other ones like pancreatic, lung cancer, they're known as old men's cancer. Actually, for lung cancer, it was known that in medical schools, they actually thought that it's taught their students that lung cancer was basically old frail guy's disease, specifically old white frail guy's disease. And now so we're starting around the early 2000s, we're seeing, and the same thing about colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, right? But now and that's why the guidelines for colonoscopies to this day are over the age of 50. We should start getting preventive colonoscopies so they can detect these polyps in your colon that may be causing a colon cancer, and you can get them cut out, right? So it's like a preventative thing. Well, if that study that came out in the early 2000s showed that the highest increase in the rate of colon cancer is actually happening in the age groups below 30. That's basically more than 20 years before doctors are telling you to start getting your preventative colonoscopy. And basically, immediately again, editorials came out in the big journals saying like, no, this is a fluke. Don't make too much out of it, right? It's just one study. And of course, you can always attack studies with statistics, right? You can say, well, the group wasn't really representative of the entire population, which to a degree, that first study was kind of true. I think it was mostly done with college students. And they're saying, well, college students, they come from a particular background, tend to come from a particular background. They have a certain amount of resources, right? So before we could, as if the poor would fare better. Like, it's like, there was a stupid argument, but the argument was made that this study was not a good representative of the entire population. Well, guess what? Every study since that one that examined colon cancer rates in the so-called young has not only confirmed its findings, but they're getting worse. So at this point, actually, the colon cancer rates in the elderly are leveling off. They're not increasing. But the cancer rates in the young, in people below 40, and especially in the people below 30, which should be the healthiest people among across the entire population, the rates there have doubled, tripled, quadrupled. And at this point, I think like if you take a specific subgroup which fares the worst, which is between the 21 and 24 years of age, their rate of colon cancer has increased by more than tenfold. This is a catastrophe. Yet the response that we're getting is that, well, it's still a very small segment of. But first it was a fluke. Then it was no, it's not statistically representative. Now it's well, maybe it's these colon cancer rates are correlated with something that we don't know about the population. Maybe because it's the young, they're doing drugs, they're leading this irresponsible lifestyle. God, who knows what it is? But they're saying the good news is that in the elderly, the cancer rates are leveling off. And I'm saying no, this is actually terrible news because guess what? All health systems around the world, at least in the most of the in the developed countries, they depend on a tacit assumption that most people don't want to talk about, which is the young and the able take care of the old and the frail, right? And the implicit assumption in most health insurance systems around the world, in the developed world, is that the young are, preferably should be insured, which is what the Obamacare did, right? But we don't want them to be using the insurance because if the young are using their insurance as much as the elderly people are, then it's a disaster. We haven't achieved anything in terms of insurance. You're actually taxing the system even more. And guess what? That's exactly what we've been starting to see. And let's go beyond colon cancer. Pancreatic cancer. Steve Jobs died from pancreatic cancer. Patrick Swayze died from pancreatic cancer. Both of them in their 50s. But now we're seeing a dramatic increase in pancreatic cancer rates in people below the age of 40, which was unheard of about 20 years ago. If somebody would get pancreatic cancer below the age of 40, chances are, and the doctors would actually actively investigate it, that this person was exposed to some sort of carcinogen. Something in the environment actually directly caused the cancer. It wasn't thought to be, they're just the rate of mutation which increases with aging, right? Because over the theory of cancer is that cancer is just based on an unfavorable mutation, and the longer you live, the higher the chance that eventually you'll get one of those mutations. But a person under the age of 40, and now we're seeing actually this happening under the age of 30, just like colon cancer, but they haven't lived long enough. And if their rates are increasing, then of course, the industry doesn't go there, doesn't even dare to talk about this. But then the whole idea about cancer being genetically driven should fall apart, right? Even beyond the tragedy of these cancers increasing in the young, really the real message of the story is that this is not due to genes. This something is happening in our environment, and medicine is turning a blind eye to it because you'll be catastrophic for the industry and for the health system in general if people realize that number one, they're getting sicker no matter what they do, and number two, there really isn't much medicine can do for them. And pancreatic cancer 5-year survival rates are in the single digits. In other words, a death sentence. Same thing for things like melanoma, lung cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the other part. Unlike the elderly people who get diagnosed with colon cancer and lung cancer and whatnot, the mortality rate for these cancers is actually also increasing in the young. So you would think that if these people, the young people, were truly healthier, you would expect them, at least in treatment, for them to fare better, right? But they're not. They're actually faring worse. So if they're faring worse, then there's something very peculiar about being young that actually makes you more predisposed to all of these diseases. So the whole gene thing really cannot survive. This has to go. This is and many doctors have already said this. CNN has published an op-ed on the fact that I think the title was like, "Oh, we got it all wrong," like as far as the genes are concerned. But so basically, autism is rising. All the cancer rates that were thought to be related to older people are rising. Some of the links that I sent you, I think you saw that basically they say that 50% of millennials and more than 75% of Generation Z are mentally ill. I mean, all of these things taken together, we're basically, and then there was another study which came out which said that the millennials are likely to die earlier than Generation X on average because of their poor health. So this is already stuff that at least public health policy is acknowledging, right? But guess what? They don't know how to solve it. So we're just gonna continue probably hearing the arguments of, "Don't worry about it, it's a fluke," right? Let's just make sure you eat less and move more, and for Christ's sake, don't touch the sugar, right? It's just a standard mantra. And now what basically we're seeing is that if you look at the age specific mortality, right? You have a person now who is 20. Well, their chance of dying is actually it's from a specific disease, not the all-cause mortality, but their chance of dying from, let's say, colon cancer is actually the same as somebody who is now at the age of 50. So in a very twisted way, you can say that the biological age, which is because we know the cancer rates increase with age, we also know at this point that cancer is actually a pretty good biomarker for biological age, or at least your risk for cancer. So in a very twisted way, you can say that the young have become the old, right? At least there's this equalizing of health, which used to be you start here at the top when you're younger, right? And then it starts to get into this declining shape, and then basically precipitously goes off the cliff around the age of 80 or 85, which is when the average life expectancy is. But now it doesn't seem to be working like that anymore. What we're seeing is that up until the age of about 12, we're getting it's actually a declining slope even then. I think the only truly healthy people that are left must be some very small subset of babies. But even the babies, we're talking about autism, we're talking about birth defects, we're talking about malformations, we're talking about cancer, even in newborns. So all of these rates have been increasing. So it's almost like from the moment you're born, you're already sick. And if you and sometimes the sickness starts even before that. It starts in the uterus. That's why one of the hottest professions right now is fetal surgery. So what you're doing is like you're operating on the mom while she's still pregnant, then you're opening up the womb and you're operating on the fetus while the baby is still in the womb, and then you stitch them all back up, and then delivery happens as normal. So it's just the fetuses are also getting sicker. So we get into the situation where several people have said the young have become the old. We don't have young people anymore. The young chronologically, right? But chronological age, it's not what can sustain an economy. Chronological age is not something that will sustain a health system, a retirement system. It's health that matters, right? It's the health span, not the lifespan. So I don't know. I think we're going to see some drastic changes over the last several years because, not several, but over the next several years, because as it is right now, we're starting to see this sort of like intergenerational fighting of who gets more benefits, because the baby boomers are retiring. They and the millennials are the two biggest generations currently alive. Then you have the Generation X kind of like sandwiched in between. They're much smaller in terms of numbers. And now it's been shown that the boomers and the millennials are. I'm sure you've seen like the memes on TV. The millennials tell the boomers, "Okay, boomer," in a very condescending way, and the boomers think the millennials are useless and they're talentless and they can't do really anything because they still live with their parents. They don't want to buy a house. They don't have jobs, right? So regardless of what you believe, which version of the story you believe, what is indisputable is that these two groups are now sort of like bumping heads because they're competing for the limited resources of the health system and potentially of the retirement and even the disability system. I know two people who are my age who are already on disability. When I was growing up, my parents, when they were my age, there was nobody that they even heard of in their vicinity who was on disability. And I'm not just the only one. I mean, if you ask people that are around you, I guarantee you they know somebody who is either on a short or long-term disability, or somebody who is being forced to work, even though they're disabled, but they're forced to work because they just can't afford to continue to maintain their lifestyle based on disability benefits, if they even have it. Some people don't have disability insurance, right? So you just kind of have to keep working. Long story short, to summarize it, the evidence strongly points towards that there are no more young people. And there's used to be that chronological age was a very good surrogate for biological age, and by biological age I mean really health, right? And now these two measurements have become completely uncoupled. In fact, basically, we should start to be only measuring the biological age, because that's what really matters to an economy, to a country. What matters is what you can do, your power, your ability to do things, to get things done, to generate new value. And if the so-called young people now are in these dire straits, then it really doesn't it doesn't portend very well for the immediate future, or even the generations that are coming later, because other studies have come out which show that whatever health problems you have, they can be passed along for the next 14 generations. Now, of course, the influence diminishes with each subsequent generation, but in a ironic twist, the first two generations after you, let's say either you and I are sick, our kids and our grandkids will be relatively okay, but it's the third generation that really tends to fare the worst. Wow. And they've already confirmed this in autistic models. They've already confirmed this on rats exposed to carcinogens, right? But not a high enough dose to cause cancer in the actual generation which is exposed to it. They're exposed to like sort of like a sub-dangerous concentration, but it's a known carcinogen. It's known to have bad effects, right? And then they allow these rats to reproduce, or mice, or whatever model they're using, and then they're seeing how their offspring fares. And then like the first generation is kind of okay. They are less healthy than their parents, which is already pretty bad. But they're still they're still hanging on there, right? I mean, they can actually do work. They can run in their wheels, the proverbial rat race. They can still participate in that. And then their children, in other words, the grandchildren of the first generation, they're actually about as healthy as their own parents. So there's a small decline between the immediate generation exposed to the toxin and then the first one, and then between the second and the third generation, there isn't much of a difference. But between the by the time you reach the third generation, which is the great grandkids of the generation exposed to the toxins, you're seeing such a dramatic decline in health that most of the animals, actually a good 40%, died very prematurely. Their lifespan was reduced by about 40%. So that's huge. Recently, I saw a study that came out that tracked average temperature of the American population starting from the Civil War, and there has been a continuous, uninterrupted decrease since the Civil War. So in a sense, many of these problems that we're seeing right now, as bad as the environment is, they were long. It looks like they were long term, a very long time in the making, because it's the body temperature that really is a surrogate for thyroid function and for systemic metabolic health. And if that has been declining over the last 200 years, I think it's a very little surprise that basically that we're in this situation right now. Add to that the birth control pills, what was I going to say, like the SSRI drugs that many people are on, the serotonergic drugs, the anti-acid drugs, which are considered completely benign, yet they're anything but. In fact, many of the proton pump inhibitor drugs that even babies, they're approved even for use on toddlers. Several countries, including Germany, actually initially refused to approve them because they thought that the animal data for them was pretty strongly pointing towards the fact that these drugs cause stomach cancer, among others, right? Yet the FDA approved it, and because the multinational pharmaceutical companies pretty much control the market in most of the developed world, if that's what is approved, that's what will become available. And they're trying to kind of like phase out the older, safer drugs such as the histamine 2 antagonists, which were preceding the PPI drugs, and even before that, people were simply taking calcium, like Tums, calcium carbonate. Simply, that was enough for them to limit the effects of stomach acid on the ulcer or whatever condition they have. So that's really where we're at right now. I mean, all the evidence points towards the fact that our so-called young people are actually in very poor health, and they're desperately clinging to whatever drugs are being given to them because they sense that things are not going well. They're following the doctor's orders, as I mentioned at the beginning. Yet they keep gaining weight, they keep becoming diabetic, they keep getting strokes. Like now, even teenagers are starting to get strokes, and nobody can explain why. But for many of these things, there's a very, very simple explanation. There's a record number of young girls, from the beginning of puberty, that have been immediately being put on birth control pills. Birth control pills have a black box warning, most of them, that they can cause strokes, right? Yet this is something that almost no doctor talks about. I mean, basically the discussion is, well, this is really a risk you shouldn't be worrying about because it only affects women over 40, right? And by the time women are over, they pass 40, then they're getting close to the menopause. So it's not that much of a worry. They're only going to be taking these pills and experiencing the risk for about 5 to 8 years. And then they hit menopause, there is no longer any need for these pills. Yet the risk is there. FDA has acknowledged the risk. Actually, FDA has put a black box warning on some of these pills because they're known to cause stroke in humans, right? Yet you don't hear this if you go to a doctor and ask. And I know, I've talked to females who these used to be on birth control, and not a single doctor ever brought up the issue of stroke. And even when these women insisted on asking about the side effects, eventually one doctor cracked and said, well, there may be a chance of a cardiovascular event, right? And they said, well, what do you mean by that? Well, if you're overweight, you have high blood pressure, and you have a genetic predisposition, there is a chance that this thing may raise your risk of a stroke or heart attack. Really? And then that woman who was challenging her doctor pulled out the printout page from the FDA and says, I don't see anything here talking about genetic predisposition or weight or anything like that. It just says that even in healthy women, this thing increases the risk of stroke. Have you seen this brochure? And at this point, the conversation with doctor is over. Like if you get to the point of challenging them like that, most doctors will say, you know what? I mean, if you know better than me, then I'm really of no use except for prescribing the drugs. And sadly or fortunately, many doctors have actually gotten into the situation where at this point they're nothing but a pill mill. You go to the doctor, they do a quick examination of your symptoms for many reasons. But first, doctors don't have time. Second, they have quotas. Many of them have loans to pay. They have to see so many patients, right? And third, because the doctors are so stressed, overworked, tired, and I mean, not many doctors are going to have the energy or the desire to sit there and discuss with you or me the possible risks, of this specific drug. It's just not humanly possible to request of every doctor to be informed. They do rely on the FDA, but the FDA has been captured by the pharmaceutical companies. And even though the FDA does issue these warnings, the way they're issued is that, I mean, when I asked the females that I know that are on birth control, I asked them, have you heard of the black box warning for birth control pills? Not a single one said yes. And the reason is that the FDA publishes these things very obscurely on its website, but there's no announcement on TV. There's no announcement on radio. There's no automatic dissemination to let's say the American Society of Gynecology, or like the American Society of Endocrinology, like all of these societies that are publishing guidelines to individual doctors of what to tell their patients or not. So most doctors are just going with the flow, prescribing whatever the FDA has approved, and even if the FDA has warnings, the doctor basically is more often than not even going to bring it up because guess what? They need that revenue, and it's almost like it's a very obvious conflict of interest. And unless they're really required to tell you, and even if they are required, most of the times they won't. So that's the situation we're currently in.
Jeez, thanks for that, Georgi. I mean, it is. It's alarming, I think, to anyone to hear some of what you just said, or all of what you just said. And for people like you and me and anyone else who has children who are going to someday inhabit this world when we're gone, I mean, this is downright almost tragic.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like genetic factors have been predominantly the main view for many years. That might not be, it might not be genetic. It's probably this more environmental factors that are at play. Can you speak just briefly to what is like the metabolic or the cellular or the bioenergetic point of view of health, and then bring that or segue that into like what are some things we can actually do then, right? Can we get in a boat that's not sinking?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't sound very good. What can we do?
We can. I don't know if we can get in the boat that's not sinking. We can plug most of the holes for now until the environment improves. And by environment, I mean several things. Ultimately, the metabolic theory says that every problem comes down, every health problem comes down to insufficient production of energy from food, right? There is a special branch of medicine that deals with so-called metabolic diseases. And it's already acknowledged that some of the diseases are in fact metabolic, like diabetes type 2, or even depression, right? And now they're saying depression is, it looks like people who are exposed to chronic stress, they may be more prone to develop depression. But they're still talking about being prone versus outrightly developing it, right? And as long as we have this distinction between inheritable disease, or at least genetically predisposed disease, versus no straight up, if you went to war and you develop PTSD, there's no need to talk about about genetic predisposition. You seeing people killed or you killing people directly caused it, right? Yeah. And even then, the mainstream version is, well, it's only 25% of the soldiers, as if this is a small number, right? But they're saying the other 75% are not developing PTSD. You know why? Actually, military screens specifically for psychopathic tendencies. And if you if you don't score high on the checklist for psychopathic behavior, chances are you will not get exposed to the most, to the really brutal sides of war. You will see it because clearly if you're driving on the streets of Baghdad and you see like dead people everywhere, there's no way to unsee that. Yeah. But in terms of if you want to join the special forces, if you want to become a pilot, if you want to become a drone operator, basically a person who just clicks a button and then so many people are killed as a result of the drone firing a rocket. These people are specifically screened to be psychopaths. And psychopaths have been shown to not be prone to developing PTSD. In fact, they enjoy, most of them enjoy this sort of violence. Now, the psychopaths do pay the price eventually by having the highest risk of cancer of any other mental health disorder. So this sort of aloof behavior that you cannot be disturbed by anything, even by human suffering or other people dying. Many people glorify this in the movies by, this was it James Bond 007, or many of the other, like the Michael Crichton novels, the Bourne Identity series. All of these movies glorify the idea of this like slick killer who is not really bothered by other people's suffering, and he just has his own agenda and keeps doing whatever he's doing. These people have been shown to have the highest rate of cancer of any other mental health disease. Oh. So basically, the idea here is like there are two ideas about health that are struggling. One is, we kind of alluded over to that. Doctors are saying, well, certain diseases run in the family, right? So to us, that means this is evidence that there is a genetic component. And this is based actually on the faulty assumption that only genes can pass on hereditary information. This dogma, called the dogma of modern biology, or the Weissman dogma, has been ruling biology and medicine for the last 80 years. Mm-hmm. And even though it was known from the very beginning that there was evidence directly contradicting it, right? It, for some reason, maybe due to lobbying, maybe because of the appeal of genes and how easy it would be to manipulate them through like drugs or gene editing, or even through computational studies. Over the 20th century, basically saw the genetic theory of disease rule almost unchecked. And over the last 5 years, or maybe 5 to 10 years, studies started to come out again saying that, look, just because something is hereditary doesn't mean it's genetic. We can actually pass information along to our children, and it's not, the genes are the same. There's no mutation, but whatever experiences we had in our life, I mean, we kind of pass them on as partial experiences to our children, and it kind of makes perfect sense. It really goes down to the two versions of evolution that exist. Many people think there's only one version, which is the Darwinian version, which is, oh, you basically, there's this population, and then the environment exerts pressure by changing the conditions, and then randomly some individuals from a specific population will undergo mutations, but the mutations are random, they're not directed. In other words, like if you suddenly, like a herd of sheep moves from a mountain down to a valley, so they're exposed to much higher temperature, much higher humidity, etc., and let's say over time, the pressure is that the sheep start shedding their thick coat, right? And then basically they grow more lean, and they're capable of withstanding more heat better, right? The Darwinian version of evolution says the way this will happen will be random. Like it's not like a certain percentage of the sheep will undergo a mutation. Is that it may happen, or it may not happen. But the ones who will survive are the ones in which this mutation does happen, right? This is the Darwinian version, so it's random and it's not directed. There was also a person called Lamarck who said that that's absolute nonsense. Nature never throws anything away. So the experience of the individual matters. The experience of the whole population matters, and it would make perfect sense if they actually pass it along to the next generation, so that the next generation is better prepared. Otherwise, they're starting at a blank slate, right? And all this knowledge that their parents had is lost, right? Well, guess what? Medicine believes that that's the current state. No matter what your parents did, if they had good genes and you inherit their genes, you'll be fine, right? That's not apparently how nature works. Nature does not like to throw anything away, and basically your experience, in other words, your health as a result of the changing environment, this memory, sort of health memory, will be passed along to the next generation, together with any mutations that you may be enduring, right? But over the lifetime of one individual, chances are you will not be experiencing any genetic mutations unless you're exposed to ionizing radiation or other things that are known as direct mutagens. But for most people, medicine says it pretty much doesn't matter what you do health-wise because it's mostly due to the genes. But now we're seeing all these studies that are showing this rapid change, and everybody agrees that it's not genes. They have measured genes. There's no change, right? So really the battle here is the genetics, which is the unchanging code of your health, which is in your genes, versus the much more dynamic, malleable version, which is, yes, you are inheriting genes, but you're also inheriting other things from your parents that are not encoded in genes, that are encoded epigenetically by having these methyl groups like turn on or off certain genes, and that configuration of on off, like, because it's unique for every individual, that is also being passed on to your children. So in other words, if you're exposed to a poor environment or a good environment, if you're exposed to radiation, if you're exposed to stress, if you had PTSD, if you had depression, this information is most certainly passed along to the next generation. So it kind of primes them. So I mean, think about it. Like if everything is environmental, right? It will make perfect sense that whatever you experience is passed on to the next generation, because chances are they will start in a similar environment like you. Yes, people do move away, people do change countries, right? But for most people, chances are that they will at least start in the environment that their parents experienced, because most children tend to start their life together with their parents, right? So that's the Lamarckian theory. In other words, what you do matters, the environment that you experience matters, the life that you live matters, the choices that you do matters. It's choice instead of chance that determines your destiny. That's what Aristotle thought as well. So this fight between genes and information and lack of change, and sort of like this idealized, perfected encoding of your organism. That's the genetic theory. That's what Plato actually taught. And even though he didn't talk about genes, he talked about idealized forms. So to this day, medicine is sort of a bit of an offshoot of Plato, in that it talks about how this piece of meat that you and I are really the imperfect implementation of the idealized forms encoded in your genes. While the Aristotelian version says there are no idealized forms. What you see is what you get and it's constantly changing, and what you do matters, and your choices matter. Yes, there is chance, right? But it's chance really is in all likelihood. It's simply because things that we don't know. That doesn't mean that they're unknowable. Doesn't mean they're unpredictable. It's simply that at this stage of our development, there's only so much we can know about the world and predict. But just because something happens that we can't explain right now doesn't mean we shouldn't be assuming automatically it's random and unpredictable and irrelevant, right? So that's where we stand right now. These are the two theories. Genetics ruled the 20th century by far, right? By a long shot. And now epigenetics is making a comeback with vengeance and saying, look, if you guys, you haven't, the epigeneticist is talking to the geneticists, typically the conversation will go along like this. Look, guys, you haven't produced a single drug based on genes, right? Nobody has been cured so far as a result of genetic work. Number one. Number two, you haven't found a single gene that is responsible for things like breast cancer, or for brain cancer, or for skin cancer, or for diabetes, or for heart disease, or for anything. Guess what? It's even worse. You have not been able to find even a group of genes that is responsible for a specific disease. Guess what? It's even worse than that. You have not even been able to find an interaction pattern between genes that's responsible for any of these diseases. So you can continue on this wild goose chase if you want and continue claiming that things are genetic, right? But so far you've produced absolutely squat. And we're going to start and develop the other theory and see where this leads us, because there are only two options here. There's, yes, the genetics are like, oh, it's probably a combination, right? Let's not throw away the genes just yet. Okay, that's fine. But until we have evidence that genes are responsible for the disease, for now, we're going to assume that they're not, because 80 plus years, actually 100 plus years, we spent chasing the idea that genes determine disease risk. And it looks like, and I just posted a study on my blog about 3 days ago, which showed that for the vast majority of people, genes are only explain about 5%, at most 5% of disease risk. This is the official genetic study just came out. So the epigeneticists are kind of coming back in power and saying, enough with all this crap, right? You guys, if you find funding for yourselves, because ultimately it comes down to funding from the government, taxpayers' money, in other words. If you're willing to convince the government to pay you to continue to investigate the genes, by all means, go ahead and do it. It's science, right? We're not going to discard it. If you find something valuable, obviously we'll use it. But until then, we will start moving in the direction of our environment matters. We have probably messed up our environment to the point that it's killing us, it's making us sick, and it's turning our children into older versions of ourselves, which is really the drastic, like this is the catastrophic thing here. And we don't want that, right? We're going to do everything possible to reverse or at least halt that, right? So we're going to start looking for environmental causes, which I think brings us to the, okay, what could those be? Well, every single disease that's out there that has a publication on it, there is another publication that has demonstrated that in most animal models, you can cause that disease by exposing the animal to chronic stress. And what do you mean by chronic stress? It simply means any event in your life for which you cannot muster up a sufficient energetic response to overcome it, right? So what could be stress? Well, your boss yelling at you, right? So most people will say, okay, well, it's unpleasant the first time, it's unpleasant the second time, it's annoying the third time, right? But the fifth, if the boss continues to yell by the fifth or sixth time, right? Most people will be like, something isn't right. This person is either abusive, or is not in his right mind or her right mind. But whatever the reason is, the impetus for most people is that this is not good. I can't handle this, right? I need to move on. Well, it's good when you can escape the stress, right? This is actually because it's when you escape the stress, it's no longer stress. But in animal studies, they have this concept called inescapable stress. In other words, they subject you to such an unpleasant and stressful event, but they don't provide you with the opportunity to go away, to move away. Like you can't leave your job. Imagine being stuck in the military, and actually, military is a great example. You go to war, you don't like any of these things that you're seeing, and you want to leave. But guess what? You leave, you get treated as a deserter. You go to jail for a very long time. You may even get court-martialed. No, you will get coercion, but depending on the seriousness of the desertion, you may even get charged with treason, and that still carries the death penalty. But even without the death penalty, the implication of being in the military is that you follow orders regardless of how you feel, regardless of what you think, and regardless of whether you think something is good or bad for you. That's inescapable That's called inescapable stress. It's a very well studied principle in animal research, right? And it's been confirmed that being subjected to inescapable stress immediately leads to every single, not immediately, I should say immediately, but it can lead to every single one of the named conditions that medicine deals with. It's every single one of the mental health disorders. It can lead to every single one of the cancers, can lead to every single one of the neurodegenerative diseases, can lead to like every single one of some of these like infertility and deformities in the offspring and all these things. So the the some doctors that I had this conversation with, they will immediately come back with the argument saying like, well, then how come some people develop this specific disease and others the other? Well, your metabolism or your ability to produce energy is not uniform, right? It's certain organs and tissues tend to fare better depending on what you inherit from your parents, depending on what your life had, right? If you're, let's say, you inherited great liver genes or great liver sort of priming environment from your parents, but you're a chronic alcoholic, chances are you will negate those benefits. So there's like one reason why somebody may be more susceptible to developing a liver disease, and others disease in other tissues and organs. But back to the idea that chronic stress, inescapable stress, has been shown to be able to cause every single disease that we currently have on the books. Why? Well, when you're under stress, what happens is that the organism perceives this as a threat and wants to overcome it. But every effort requires energy. So initially, like basically the organism, uses whatever energetic stores it has, usually in the form of glycogen, right? And then basically it hopes that this energetic reserve will be enough to overcome the stress. And this is a form of sort of called healthy adaptation. In fact, if you can muster up the energetic response and overcome the stress, chances are you will experience this as a positive learning experience. You will know what this event is like. You will extract a valuable lesson/information from it. And then when you're faced with it the next time, you'll tend to fare better, right? But what happens if you cannot muster up the energetic response? Well, first of all, if your glycogen is gone, then basically your body needs to keep you alive, right? If you're being chased by an enemy with a rifle on the front lines, the body will basically do everything possible to allow you to survive. And since that requires a lot of energy, basically being in this extreme environment, the body will trigger the so-called fight or flight response, which is based on the adrenals, right? So it's the body through the brain will signal the adrenals to say, produce the stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, because we need more fuel. And how are these hormones relate to fuel? Well, cortisol will shed any muscle, skin, and any kind of organ tissue that's composed of amino acids, will shred it and dump it into the bloodstream. And these amino acids in the liver get quickly converted into glucose. So that's the extra energy you're getting from. And if that's not enough, then adrenaline, since adrenaline also rises when under stress, I think everybody knows that, right? It's called the adrenaline shot, even adrenaline junkies, they pursue this because they like the high that they get from it, right? Yeah. Because whenever cortisol and adrenaline release, endorphins are also released. We're going to talk about why in a minute. So adrenaline also rises, and the purpose of adrenaline is to shred your fatty tissue, also dump it in the bloodstream, and that's like another source of energy that your cells can use to produce energy, right, and overcome this immediate stress, right? The endorphins are also being released, and the endorphins block pain. So it's like these are these natural opioid molecules similar to heroin, similar to oxycodone, similar to many of the painkillers that you get after really major surgery, or even cancer patients get them because they're under this chronic intolerable pain. Well, this comes at a cost. First of all, I don't need to explain to anybody that if cortisol is high and it shreds your muscles, it's not a good result, right? Many people think, oh, but adrenaline is high, I'm going to lose all this fat. It's awesome, right? No, actually, so anytime there is fat present in your blood, and correspondingly, the more fat, the stronger the response. The body interprets this, rightfully so, that you're under stress. So while there's elevated fat in the bloodstream, you will not be able to metabolize glucose properly. In fact, if this elevated fatty acids, if the levels of fatty acids are chronically elevated, they'll actually induce so-called insulin resistance. They block the insulin from its ability to actually bind with the insulin receptor and activate it, so you'll become temporarily diabetic. Well, if you believe in the genetic theory, the genetics will say, oh, don't worry, as soon as the stress is gone, you'll revert right back to normal, right? because there's nothing in your genes that says you will be diabetic, unless you do, right? If you're predisposed to diabetes, maybe you will become diabetic. But the same, if unless you have that gene, this chronic stress, this elevated free fatty acids, right? Don't worry about it. They're not going to harm you permanently. Well, the Lamarckian theory says no, that's not how it works. This thing called adaptation. I mean, that's the signal. If this stress, like imagine running away from an enemy that's trying to kill you. Yeah, sure. If it's a one-time short event, you'll be very stressful, be very unpleasant, right? But if you can muster up the energetic response, you'll be fine. You actually probably treat it as an exciting competition event, right? If you cannot muster up the energetic response, then cortisol and adrenaline will rise, the stress response will be triggered, right? But as long as you escape, you'll be okay, and then you revert back to normal. Yet the metabolic theory says no. If this continues for too long, and your free fatty acids are always elevated, your cortisol always elevated, you will basically adapt and revert back to a much more primitive state of existence, which the only thing you care about is survival, right? Yeah. And in that state, basically, your brain, it's known by neurologists, and it's never been denied, that your brain contains multiple areas, and some of them responsible for higher cognitive functions like creativity, or desire to form social bonds, or desire to help others, altruism, the desire to help another person in trouble, like empathy. So all of these things in a situation where your immediate existence is threatened, all of these things disappear simply because, and it's very logical, very, very expected, intuitive. The brain says, I don't need these things. They take energy. And right now I'm trying to survive. So I need all the energy I can use and concentrate it on heart beating, muscle contraction, right? Like things that, quick reactions in situation of stress, so I can escape this immediate threat. And like we said, once off, like every once in a while, like threats that are acute but end quickly, you'll probably be okay. It's still not certain because the science is not very clear on that. Yeah. But imagine being in this state all the time. And that's what chronic stress is. So you don't need to be chased by an enemy all the time. All you need is events in your life that maintain this chronic activation of the stress response, right? And for many people think, well, you cannot really draw a parallel between a mean boss and a person trying to kill you on the front, during war. I'm like, sure you can. As long as the biochemical response is the same or similar, they're actually indistinguishable. Maybe you will not be as scared as being in a situation where somebody can shoot you or kill you by other means. But as long as the stress response is activated to the body, there is no difference, right? To your cells, to your metabolic production of energy, this is no different. So ultimately, chronic stress by any event, and I like I said, it doesn't have to be life-threatening, by any event that is chronic and does not allow the stress response to stop so that we can recover. Any event that continues like that, it could be a combination of events in it. For most of us, there are, right? We can have a mean boss. We can have a sick relative we need to take care of. So people are like, well, how is this bad for you? Well, if they require permanent care and you have to be taking care of them 24/7, this requires energy, right? Ultimately, it comes down to the ability to produce energy. So you can have a combination of fairly benign looking events such as having a mean boss or like a sick relative or a sick spouse or sick children, right? Or having to do work in the backyard of the house. All of these things require energy, and if they combined lead to a chronic deficiency of energy, in other words, you're not able to produce enough energy from food to meet those demands, then the stress response gets activated, which is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, HPA. It's very well known. You can even Google it, HPA axis. Immediately, Wikipedia page will come out, and you'll see. Even Wikipedia at this point describes the role of chronic HPA activation in every disease you can think of. Yet, if you talk to a doctor about it, to this day, the response will be, "Yeah, it only matters if you're genetically predisposed." Okay, where are these genes, doctor? Well, I don't know. I mean, don't ask me. I'm just following rules, and they are. That's really the sad part. Because of the differentiation of labor in the medical field, your doctor really can't really do much even if they want to, right? It's like they're following orders. They have to protect themselves from lawsuits or the state board taking away their license. So they have to follow what the FDA says. But the evidence out there is indisputable that the chronic stress response due to one or more events which combined pose more demands on your consciousness, so to speak, than the energy available to meet those demands. Yeah. then this chronic state, in this chronic deficiency and in stress reactivation, stress overactivation response, if this continues for too long, eventually all hell breaks loose, and your most susceptible tissues are likely to respond first by forming specific pathologies. You can get there's an epidemic of fatty liver disease, which is one of the links I sent you, right? So it could be due to many people, drinking and not eating properly. There's an epidemic of cancer, colon cancer and whatnot. Could be due to because the colon is part of the digestive system. If we're eating all these carcinogenic gums, carrageenan and whatnot, maybe the digestive system is already compromised. And when you add stress on top of it, that's already enough to trigger like the genesis of cancer. So really, any disease, if you follow the Wikipedia page, it's pretty well written. I'm actually, I would, if it was me, I would make it a required reading for every general practitioner doctor out there, because you'll be astounded at how blind and ignorant they are. Like many of them, if they know about HPA axis, you'll be from medical school. Like since then, they only consider it as relevant if somebody with a PTSD comes along, because in people with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's known that the HPA axis is chronically activated, cortisol is high, testosterone and progesterone are low, and DHEA are low, right? So the doctors try to treat based on symptom. So this person will come in, they'll get their blood test done, the doctors will see that the HPA is activated, they'll try to sort of deactivate it, right? But guess what? These same tests should be done for everybody with a health condition, right? But they're not, because the official dogma is that the HPA axis does not matter for those conditions, at least officially. Forget about what Wikipedia says. Forget about all this research. It's considered unofficial until the medical community accepts it as official, and this could take decades. And in many cases, it has taken centuries for the genetic theory to accommodate the idea that things that happen to you can be passed along to the next generation in a non-genomic manner. So if we judge by history, I don't think the medical community will accept anytime soon that being yelled at constantly, on a daily basis. It doesn't have to be like every single minute. It can lead to disease. That will open the floodgates to a lot of people filing lawsuits saying, "Oh my God." I mean, if you think about it, most of us live a lifestyle that's so stressful that if this theory is true, I mean, we're killing ourselves every day. And the tragedy of this is that many people feel like there is no escape, right? So you're saying like, okay, what can we do?
Yeah.
Well, starts with, just as they say in the Alcoholics Anonymous, first you start with realizing you have a problem, right? Or at least admitting that stress is a problem. You start admitting that the energetic deficiency is a problem. It does not lead to just metabolic diseases. They're all metabolic. At least the evidence so far points in that direction. So anything that seems like it's stressing you chronically, it's probably not worth it. For many people, the stress may be self-imposed. They're saying, "Oh, I have a terrible job, but it pays well," right? Well, if you have the option of not working that job, in other words, if you really don't, I mean, anybody will say, I should say that most people say, well, you can always use extra money. Yes, you can always use extra money, but you don't always need extra money. So in other words, if you can maintain your family and your lifestyle with a job that's less stressful, then you should probably be doing that if you care about your health, right? No money in the world will be able to buy your health if you get stricken with some bad, irreversible, chronic disease. Because medicine, all of this would have been okay to a degree if medicine had actually provided solutions, right? I mean, you can say, okay, well, you know what? If I work for 20 years in the startup industry and I become a multimillionaire, and as a result of that, I get, I don't know, liver cancer or like colon cancer, it will be okay if the money that I made was capable of curing me, right? And then I had some left over. That will be the cost benefit analysis that many economists will do. Well, guess what? First of all, it's a faulty analysis. I don't think there's such a thing as being able to fully recover to your previous health is after it's already ruined, right? I mean, you can recover, but the current medicine cannot provide you with that option. At best, you're talking about management of symptoms, and at worst, it can kill you, right?
Yeah.
So, and you never know what the chance of this is. You were born with predisposition to diseases because your ancestors were stressed. Your ancestors underwent some like terrible conditions, and this is imprinted on you. It's not genetic, but it's imprinted. So because we don't know what background we come in beyond the immediate ancestors like your parents and grandparents, or maybe even great grandparents, so that's just 3 generations.
Yeah.
If things are imprinted for 14, chances are that most of us don't know what baggage, so to speak, we come with into this world. So I think it behooves us to be cognizant of stress, especially chronic stress, and do what we can to limit it. Stress, as there was a famous Canadian researcher called Hans Selye,
Yeah.
who dedicated his life to studying stress. He said, "Stress kills. Have some respect for it." So I think that's the first step. Second step is we need to start caring about nutrition a lot more than we currently do. Unfortunately, this is easier said than done because for most people, the situation here is that there are always these fad diets running around, right? There are always these things that doctors recommend, but then if you go to another doctor, he or she will recommend something else. The FDA kind of tries to stay away from this, except publishing this pyramid, I think it was the USDA, that basically tells you like each food type and how many servings per day you should have of it, right? But the current version of it is terrible. It basically talks about eating these resistant starches 5 to 6 servings per day or even more. Yet all the evidence points to the fact that you should be eating food that's easily digestible and easy to assimilate. If you eat food that's not easy to digest, you're feeding your intestinal bacteria and they produce a number of bad chemicals, endotoxin being the primary one, which now has been implicated as a cause in virtually every chronic condition, just like stress. But guess what? The endotoxin can trigger the stress response. So you can give yourself stress even without environmentally not being under stress by simply eating the wrong foods. And unfortunately, the official recommendations right now are terrible. They actually directly lead you to that situation of causing the stress response by eating crappy food. But nutrition matters, and I think if somebody wants simple guidelines, the simplest I can offer is that look at how your grandparents ate and try to replicate that. Simplicity is matter. Simplicity is key. And if anything has more than 5 ingredients on the label, chances are it's probably not a good idea to eat it because even if, let's say, something has 20 ingredients, which most of the processed foods do, try to walk into Starbucks and look and take one of the sandwiches that they sell and look at how many ingredients there are. The sandwich looks pretty simple. It's just bread, right, with cheese and some kind of meat. I'm just picking up an example to keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
But if you actually look at the ingredients, there are actually over 30 ingredients for a specific ham and Swiss sandwich. The bread contains not just flour and water, right? Contains yeast, contains a number of different iron supplements because by law the iron has to be fortified with iron. The bread has to be fortified with iron. It's got a number of different vitamins. It's got these vegetable oils which are pretty bad, and we've discussed in previous podcasts.
Yeah.
It probably contains one or more of the emulsifiers, the carrageenan, the gums, etc., etc. And this is just the bread. So the bread itself, it looks like bread, but it's actually composed of at least 10 or more different ingredients. Why is this bad? Well, like I said, even if all of them are okay, the more ingredients you have, the less amount per ingredient, right? Because it's just a number means the more you have them as a number, the less quantity of each there will be in order to fit within a specific amount. Yeah. So if you're taking an ounce of bread and it contains only 2 ingredients, right? For simplicity's sake, I'll be like, let's just say water and flour, then probably half an ounce will be flour and half an ounce would be bread. Half an ounce would be flour, half an ounce would be water, right? Yeah. But if you have 20 ingredients, then yes, one of them may be half an ounce or more, but on average, if you have 20 ingredients, each one of them will be a lot less than half an ounce. Yeah. Why does this matter? Because FDA regulations say that you don't have to list things on the label if they are below certain amount per serving. Mm-hmm. So let's say I can put I'm giving a bad example. I was going to say uranium. I can put lead, like the metal that's known to basically be carcinogenic, destroy your bones, destroy your bone marrow, and really have terrible toxic effects. I can put lead in that sandwich as long as it's less than 10 parts per million, I think is the current, or billion. But the more ingredients you have, and I'm giving a fairly example that's really it's shocking, but some less shocking things because lead is known to be toxic, like talc or titanium dioxide, which are used as excipients for pills. They're also allowed as food items because they're anti-caking agents. They're also pretty good as preservatives. Silica, which is powder glass, it's not only allowed in foods, it's allowed even in organic foods. So, but it has to be below a certain amount per serving. So guess what? By increasing the number of ingredients, you're getting to a point where you can put enough silica, enough talc, enough titanium dioxide, enough emulsifier, enough of anything that could be very dangerous for you, but you don't even have to report it on the label. And unfortunately, that's the situation we're in right now with many, if not most, of the foods you get from the store. But there's still hope. There are foods out there. If you're careful, if you look at the label, usually the guideline is how many ingredients are on the label. Like I said, if you have more than 5, chances are basically it's a food item made for profit. They're all made for profit, but it's basically somebody took the shortcut and developed this with cheaper ingredients and with harmful ingredients just to keep their costs low, while at the same time selling this as an item that's supposed to be healthy. And so they're making a much bigger profit of margin. It's not surprising actually if you go to the organic stores, if you look at the products that have the least number of ingredients, they're usually the most expensive. Yeah. And the reason is because if you actually develop something for health, it will require, basically we're putting less ingredients, but each one of these ingredients, because they will be in a higher quantity, and if they're of the good kind, that will raise the cost of production. But I wouldn't use price necessarily as an indicator. I would price, label, basically if there's anything, I would research the company too, because sometimes the company will put one thing on the label, but if you go to their website and search for the product, sometimes they'll have like the full list of ingredients, and then you'll be scared when you read what's there. So unfortunately, these days, keeping your health in a good state requires a bit of an effort on our part. So food matters tremendously. Social relationships matter tremendously. A number of studies came out which show that people who have a sense of community, a sense of family, and feel like their relationships with their relatives and friends are strong, they were actually had a dramatically lower risk of all-cause mortality throughout the entire lifetimes. So we're not talking about just heart attacks and which are known to be associated with loneliness and depression. We're talking about every disease out there, including infectious diseases. Your immune system cares whether somebody cares about you. Your immune system cares about whether you care about somebody else. So but the biochemical explanation usually comes down to cortisol. In other words, feeling as part of a community, feeling as if other people care about you, and feeling as if you care about other people keeps the HPA axis deactivated. In other words, if you don't perceive the world as a threat, and a big portion of that is feeling like you have the social support network that can protect you, then the HPA axis does not need to be activated, right? You will not be, the message from the world is not everybody's an enemy. You have friends, right? Things will be okay. Even if you are somehow incapacitated or you need help, there will be people there to help you. Just as importantly, it's been shown that it's not just about you. Like many people, our culture tends to overemphasize taking care of yourself. But it's also been shown that taking care of others also has dramatically positive effect on health. Also keeps the HPA axis in a deactivated state. And one of the reasons probably is, again, if you care about others, maybe, even in a very simplistic level, you'll be expecting reciprocation in return. So if you need help, other people will be able to help you. It's not yet clear. I think actually it's not as simplistic. It's like there's something about the brain that makes it work better and produce energy better when it's involved in a meaningful activity, and caring about others and doing good things for others is one of the best examples of a meaningful activity.
Wow. That's awesome. So it sounds like even the everyday things that are increasing that are stressful and that people see as stressful, even if they're regular things like working in the backyard or going to work or things that are just perceived, like it's almost like more things are perceived as stressful in small or large part because our energetic stores are so low.
Precisely.
And so anything that can increase our energetic stores are really going to be beneficial, because then we'll see these challenges, these stresses more as opportunities, more as kind of fun.
Exactly, as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity to learn, right?
Yeah.
But the ability to learn and to grow also requires energy. So it's really not about perception of stress. It's about anything that the world throws at you, including just being awake, will be a stress if you cannot muster up the energetic response to actually incorporate into your consciousness. Hypothyroid people, severely hypothyroid people, they can actually freak out just by having another unknown person being in the room with them, because it's just too much of information they need to cope with, and the ability, just the potential this person could be a threat. It's something that the brain needs to process. Most of us don't think about these things because we've never been in such a situation. But a person with a truly compromised energetic state, to them actually everything is a threat.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever dealt with like critically ill people. They're extremely irritable. They can get violent for the most over the most benign looking things, like you put their glass of water on the wrong side of the table, or like you call them not with the name that they wanted to. So it's like, and anybody who's cared about elderly people in retirement homes has probably run into a situation like that, and they probably think, oh, it's just mental illness. No, actually, mental illness, what we call mental illness, is the chronic state of brain energetic deficiency, and it just manifests in a different way. In some people, it results in depression, so they're sad all the time, they don't want to do anything. In other people, actually, it results in aggression, right? Because they perceive you as a threat, or anything else really perceived as a threat. Then they fight back. First, they try to escape, but animal studies have shown that the first thing that when you harass an animal, right, in most cases, the first response of the animal is not to attack, because it takes energy. And actually, it takes less energy to escape, usually, than it is to turn around and attack you. So this whole glorifying of aggression and of fighting back and everything else, that may be a valid response after continued aggression. But if that's the immediate response, that's actually not a sign of good health. Like, the person tries to walk away from trouble before getting engaged in the trouble, because once you're already engaged, you're part of it, right? It's already a less optimal situation than avoiding the trouble altogether and going about your business.
So it sounds so Georgi, like we have this challenge in front of us to increase our biological resources,
right?
And it's more of an opportunity, really, I guess, than a challenge. But for this whole topic of the declining health of the young, it boils down to, can we increase our available energy so that life isn't seen so commonly as such a threat. And I want to point listeners to your work on the Ray Peat Forum. You post under the name Haidut,
right.
Haidut, and you also have a website, haidut.me, haidut.me, haidut.me. I also want to point listeners to Ray Peat's work. You can visit raypeat.com directly and read some of his articles. I think we're all, you and Ray are speaking this language of how can we increase our energetic resources.
Right.
And I think when it comes to dealing with stress and living below that HPA axis, it's all about having the resources to do that. Georgi, if you were going to go back in time, we'll kind of end it here. I think this might be fun, but if you were going to go back in time and talk to your 6-year-old self, what would you say to him?
I would say that one of the things that I've struggled with is that I was actually a competitive athlete throughout high school and in college and even after college, and I think to a degree that's what led me to some of my health problems, right? When I look back, I was actually overexerting myself most of the time, and this was considered as glorious. Basically the coaches were like, "Good job, that's how you beat the competition. That's how you become number one, right?" Yeah. And I thought, like, now that I'm older, I'm thinking like, well, for what, right? I mean, basically, if ultimately the price we pay is extremely compromised health, then it doesn't matter, like, if you achieved all these things. I mean, you want to be a good father, right? I mean, there's still things to do, and if you got yourself to a point where you don't have the energy to do the things that still need to be done, then it wasn't exactly a positive engagement / experience. Yeah. And I think a step beyond that is the realization that many times in life, if somebody asks you to do things that are immediately beneficial for them, but they promise you like some kind of a nebulous benefit for you in the future, chances are I don't want to call it a scam, but a situation where they're trying to get you to draw in a situation where we're really not doing the best things for you and for the people you care about, right? So this whole over competitiveness, in my experience, is really detrimental because it leads down a very toxic path. It's just the very idea of competition it activates the HPA, right? But when you're younger, when things are interesting, when you have the energy to respond to it, it feels like a game, and you learn from it, right? So that part of it, I think, is positive. But over time, this transfers over into the business world, into your social relationships, and things. If you're competitive there as well, um, people say, "Oh, it's great to be competitive in business. It's all about vanquishing the competition." Well, that's not how life works. Like this whole story about nature being, extremely competitive, survival of the fittest, that's actually a very perverse view. And if you look at the evidence, it's much more nuanced. The whole thing about the alpha male, vanquishing the enemies, collecting all the resources, all the females, and all the food for himself, and then he lives happily ever after. That's actually not how this works in most societies, animal societies. The alpha male is under constant threat by either other alphas or betas or even the females. So if he starts to really like run his horse without any consideration for the rest in the face of limited resources, this person very quickly, this individual, this organism very quickly gets deposed and can get even killed simply because it's a much more communal sense of life than what our current culture tries to impose on us. It's not about you versus everybody else. It's about living your life in service to yourself and others. And if you try to live it only in service to yourself, this will quickly get spotted. This parasitism will get called out. And chances are that even in life, you will not do very well. And then, and if you live it only for others, then you have to be careful because there are parasites on the other side as well. And all this, when I say parasites, all pathology ultimately stems down from energetic deficiency. So I'm not blaming them. I don't think they're any way bad people or bad organisms. But keep in mind that many times when you're getting drawn into things that your intuition says this will require too much effort, it really, I don't feel like doing it. Usually you're on the right track because many of these things that are being presented to you as being, it's a higher moral calling, right? You have to go to war to defend your country. You have to, well, if you're under attack, yes. But if you're not under attack, I don't think there is a good justification for going to war and killing other people who are probably sent to war with the exact same message as you, right? Go and kill each other in the name of what? Even if you survive the war, compromise health, potentially wounded, right? Potentially handicapped. I mean, this if you have any family that tends to destroy it, right? Let's face it, nobody wants to live with a handicapped like disabled person. It's a taxing on the family as well, right?
Yeah.
So you destroy your family, destroy your health, and for what? I mean, you don't even get paid. I mean, not that money is an issue in this situation, but like it's like the worst possible combination of things. And I think that's why many veterans develop depression after they come back from the war. Actually, it's been demonstrated already. It's because they at some point they realize that in most cases it was for nothing, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're one of those psychopaths who got specifically selected to go to the special forces and kill others for fun. Chances are, if you're a normal human being and you come back from war, this is what happened after the Vietnam War. There was by some estimates, 62% of the people who came back from Vietnam suffered from clinical depression. 62%. And they had to face an unpopular war, right? So basically, they were sent there against their will. It was a draft situation, so they didn't want to go. They came back, and their own families disowned them, essentially, in many cases. They hated them. There were these like attacks on soldiers by the civilian population after the Vietnam War. The media basically kept talking about how this war was evil. There were baby killers, right? So if you're a normal person, this will drag you down. And that's what happened. 62% of them developed clinical depression. Keep in mind, these are official statistics from the military, which means reality was probably worse. So bottom line is be mindful of stress, be mindful of your nutrition, be mindful of things that are being presented as necessary to be done, but very, very hard, right? Chances are, if that's the case, then it's really probably not necessary for you at least, or for the ones you care about and the people you care about. And really that, the whole idea that life should be a constant struggle, this is a very perverse message, and it was developed specifically to keep the masses under control, to tell you that that's how nature works. And many things you see on TV are actually specifically curated to keep you in that mindset. So really, life, if you're in good health, life should be like the ideal life should be like the life of a 6-year-old child, filled with anticipation about the next day. Oh, what else is going to happen? What new thing I'm going to learn, what new toy I may be able to get.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to meet with my friends. We're going to have so much fun. We're going to do all these interesting things. If you think about what I just said, and then you try to apply it to your life, chances are if you're over 30, that would sound like either utopia or something very annoying. You'll be thinking like, I'm too old for this, right? But guess what? If you're too old for this, all this means, going back to the biological versus chronological age,
Yeah.
all this means is that your health is compromised. You just, things that should be fun become threat, become stress, become a drag on you because they also require energy. So nothing really will be fun, nothing really will be interesting if your energetic resources are not there to meet that demand. That's how life really works.
Do you think it would be far easier to achieve this kind of state if we weren't living in a world or in a country, in a society that so messages the idea that hustling, that competing, that always striving to be better than you are? I mean, that seems to be the common messaging. So obviously we got our work cut out for us, but
Exactly. Well, I mean, I think this question kind of answers itself. Yeah, absolutely, because the natural state of humans is to be in a fun, relaxed, empathetic, altruistic state.
yeah,
All of these things that I just said, these four things, if you take their opposite, like the competition, barbaric, evil, right, selfish, all these things are actually things that our culture currently promotes. But there is no evidence that that's how the world works, even in the jungle, right? I'm not saying that things are great. They're clearly predators kill to eat, right? But they kill to eat. They don't kill. They're not always like we've gotten to the point of killing to eat to killing for fun or
yeah.
killing for profit, and there's nothing in nature that justifies that. There's no known example. Only in humans, and only in human societies which have been ruled by an authoritarian system, which basically tries to keep the population under control, to keep it from understanding how life really should be and how life really is in the absence of an oppressive force. Because if the people do realize that, then of course they're going to rise up and overthrow it. And that's something, it's not a coincidence that the word revolution is a dirty word in Western societies. If you go to like any other country, if you go to like even the Asian countries, which sometimes tend to be fairly autocratic, the word revolution, or at least whatever word they use for that, many times carries with it an inherent sense of nobility. Like if you perceive that you are oppressed, you should revolt, right? It's considered dishonorable to sit there and lick somebody's boot, who is oppressing you. That's actually in Japan. It was considered during the samurai time. It was considered better to be dead, but honorable, than to lick somebody else's boot. I mean, that's an extreme version of it. But in many societies outside of our current Western civilization, to revolt against an oppressive force was considered that one of the highest virtues, was considered like probably the only true moral calling that you have in this life, because you're defending yourself and the people you care about.
Awesome. Georgie, this has been great.
Thanks, man. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
again. Yeah, thank you again and again for your time, for your knowledge, for your experience, for your energy, and for your thoughtfulness. This is great. I'm sure the listeners are going to love this. And until next time.
All right, man. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Thank you.